Hi everyone, my name is Pierrick and I work as a Developer Relations Engineer for the Google Ads API. Welcome to the Optimization Score and Recommendation series. In this episode, I cover the technical details of handling errors and testing recommendations. For a complete list of the resources and previous episodes, please check the video description. I'll discuss some concepts that require basic knowledge of Google Ads API reports and mutates. Feel free to check all technical guides if you need a refresher. Alright, let's start with a quick reminder of what we already discussed in previous episodes. An optimization score below 100% means that there is room for improvement. In such a case, the Google Ads API may share recommendations via the Google Ads service and allow applying or dismissing them via the recommendation service. Each recommendation represents one change that can be applied to optimize the performance of a campaign. You can retrieve eligible recommendations with their full context in real time using the recommendation report resource. Also, you need the resource name and parameters for customization when you apply a recommendation, but you only need the resource name when you dismiss one. Now, let's move on to the actual topic of this video, errors. Any system should expect errors to happen. Even if you avoid the vast majority of errors by making valid calls to the Google Ads API, it's important to define and implement strategies that scale in case things don't work as expected. In this section, I'll discuss the most common types of error that you may encounter with this type of integration. It's not an exhaustive list, but it should give you a good understanding of what to expect and should help you build the right solutions for your applications. I start with the most generic ones. Like with any Google Ads API calls, there is always the possibility to be hit by authentication, limit, or internal errors. You can check the links if you're interested to learn more about those. The next type of error is related to empty results. Some fields can be returned empty, so your execution could fail if you don't cover this edge case. In this first example, if the optimization score is empty, it will lead to an unexpected message. The best way to avoid issues is to adapt the behavior based on the return values. In this particular case, we print unscored when the score isn't set. Another possible option would be to add a filter to the getCall query so that only customers with actual optimization scores are returned. The next type of error is related to the life cycle of recommendations. They occur when you try to apply or dismiss recommendations that are not in suitable states. Typically, you cannot apply a recommendation that's already applied, you cannot dismiss a recommendation that's already dismissed, and you cannot take any action on a recommendation that's invalidated. That's because it doesn't meet the eligibility criteria anymore. To avoid this type of error, it's recommended to check the state of the recommendations before taking actions on them. Alright, moving on to validation errors now. Some occur in the context of search requests. Search requests are crucial and can lead to major issues when they fail, so it's important to get them right. Here, I provide a subset of errors that could be triggered if you use invalid getCall queries in your search request. getCall only supports basic features, so the queries used to retrieve optimization scores and recommendations should be fairly simple to build and maintain. But be careful on the client side when you process the results, because it can lead to execution errors if it's not done properly. It's recommended to be especially careful if you generate getCall queries dynamically from inputs. It can easily lead to errors. Mutate requests can also return validation errors, as you can see here. Most errors are related to required fields or invalid values. For example, if for whatever reason you provide a negative CPC bid value when applying a keyword recommendation, then the request will fail with an invalid bid amount error. The use of bulk mutate requests can lead to additional validation errors. As a reminder, this type of request allows you to apply or dismiss multiple recommendations at once. We dedicated an entire episode to this feature, so feel free to watch it if you want to learn more. In short, you need to send at least one operation, but not too many of them. You cannot send more than one operation per recommendation. And you cannot send operations with different types of recommendation without enabling the partial failure mode. Now, let's talk about concurrency issues. They happen when processes make concurrent requests that impact each other. We recommend to take these issues into account in the design because they can be fairly common depending on your applications and users. In this first example, imagine that your application regularly searches for and applies keyword recommendations for a Google Ads account. Now, imagine that another application you don't know sends a request to apply the exact same recommendation at the exact same time as you do. In this case, your apply request could fail due to a concurrent modification error. In this second example, imagine that you apply the recommendation sometime after the other application. Now it fails with a validation error because you tried to apply the recommendation even though it was already applied. In this third example, imagine that you apply a recommendation after the other application added the maximum number of keywords to the ad group. It fails again with a validation error because you applied the recommendation even though the number of keywords was already at the limit. If you own multiple applications, you can avoid concurrency issues by sending requests at different times. But the best you can do to avoid concurrency issues with applications you don't own, like the Google Ads UI, is to take actions on recommendations promptly after retrieving them. The most important thing to keep in mind is that your applications will always experience some failures because of unpredictable factors, such as concurrency, context, network, latency, or internal issues. That's why we highly recommend designing your applications to be as resilient as possible and to be as simple to troubleshoot as possible. Typically, you could continuously log requests with responses and errors. You could use the partial failure mode in bulk requests to isolate failing operations. And you could automatically retry requests when meaningful. Alright, we covered the most common types of error that you may encounter. Now, how can you test your applications? Well, it depends on the type of test you're interested in making. For unit tests, most client libraries support dedicated frameworks and features. You can check their documentation or ask the community to learn more. For integration tests, the most flexible option is to mock the Google Ads API with canned or dynamically generated responses. And for manual tests, you can use Google Ads accounts. Google Ads test accounts are pretty limited though. Let me explain. As you may already know, recommendations are retrieved in real time and they are generated by Google based on historical performance of campaigns. But because Google Ads test accounts cannot run ads, you will never find recommendations or optimization scores for them. You can use test accounts for basic tests, but you need to use real Google Ads accounts for more complex ones. If you want to search optimization scores and recommendations, it's completely safe to use any accounts you have access to because it's read-only. Just keep in mind that even real accounts don't necessarily have optimization scores and recommendations, and it changes over time. If you want to apply or dismiss recommendations, though, you need to use real request.edit accounts. You may already know the validate-only mode that can be used to test some requests on real accounts without impacting them. It's not something that's supported here, so you need to use real accounts that you can edit without impacting users. If you don't have access to any of such accounts, another option is to create some for the sole purpose of testing. Spending a few cents on dummy campaigns on real accounts is enough to generate traffic, recommendations, and optimization scores in a few hours. Also, there is a few tricks you can use regardless of the accounts you end up using for your test. Some types of recommendation are more common than others, so it is better to use the ones that are more common first. Dismissed recommendation can be applied but cannot be undismissed, so it's better to use dismissed recommendations first as well. The same recommendations can surface multiple times, so it's useful to revert any applied changes to give them a chance to come again. For example, after applying keyword recommendations, you can revert the changes by removing the keywords added by the applied recommendations. You can revert the changes manually using the Google Ads UI or automatically using other services of the Google Ads API. Alright, that's all I had on this. If you're interested in this kind of integration, you can check other dedicated resources listed here and check the other episodes of this series. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in other videos.